Welcome everyone to our parent chat tonight. We really appreciate you being here. I hope that everything is working tech-wise. I feel like we've been blessed today with that. So everything hopefully will go smoothly from here on out. For those of you who are here, I would love for you to just put in the chat how old your kids are, and also let us know what brings you here tonight, because we understand that your time is extremely valuable. So to make the choice to come and join us, obviously there's something that you're hoping to learn, or there's a reason that you're here. So we would love to hear from you in the chat box. As we go on tonight, I would love to encourage you to ask questions, and you can do that through the Q&A box, which is typically found at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, and you can put your questions there so we don't lose them in the chat box. So that puts them in a nice, tidy little spot where we can find those. So tonight, as you probably know, we're talking about emotional regulation, and this is for all ages, right? Everybody has emotions, so we may learn a little bit about regulating our own emotions. But tonight we have our guest Marcel talking about how do we help our kids to learn the process of regulating their own emotions. And one thing that we know for sure from the pandemic is the emotions kind of got really, really big and really extreme. So you may be having some of that in your household. If you are experiencing that, just know that you are not alone. So welcome, Marcel, to our parent chat tonight. We are so fortunate to have you here, and we are looking forward to learning so much from you. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm popping on here. It does say that the chat looks disabled for our attendees. So someone just chatted that. So I thought I would just let you know. So, okay, well,
Marcel, we'll work on that while you get started, okay? And so for those of you who are on here, we really do want to hear from you. So we'll figure out the chat stuff on the back end as Marcel gets started.
Wonderful. Well, I will go ahead and introduce myself here and pull up my screen. I have some slides to share this evening. So, all right, there we go. You should be able to see that all right?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, my name is Marcelle Waldman. I come from a teaching background. I was a kindergarten teacher and a preschool teacher over on Mercer Island. I have been a parent and community educator for quite some time now. I am an author. I've created some hands-on resources for children for use in homes and in classrooms. My daughter and I just most recently wrote a book together as well about emotions. So emotion regulation is really something that I spend a lot of time talking about. So I'm very privileged to be here with you this evening. So thank you so much for having me. All right, I will just jump in. So as Sherry mentioned, tonight's topic is emotional regulation. And we're going to start with understanding how emotions really influence the brain and how we can support our children's regulation. So here we go. So I want to first say that we're going to talk about understanding what self-management is, because self-management is a piece of that. How do we manage ourselves when our emotions are feeling high? And so to begin with that, I need to back up just a little bit to something called emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is really our smarts when it comes to our emotions. And that is something, as you know, adults, we're still getting in tune with, or even, you know, the newest research on what emotional intelligence means and how important it is to our lives. So this is something that really has been in the works for quite some time now, but really coming at the forefront, and especially with the pandemic that we are have been in. So I'm going to read you the definition that comes from Salovey and Mayer from 1990. Emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions and discriminate among them to use the information to guide one's thinking and actions. So again, that's using what we know about our feeling and others' feelings to figure out sort of what to do in a situation. So there's a lot of parts to that. So what we're going to do this evening is really focus on the piece of the emotion regulation, which is self-management. Okay, so this is really personal regulation. So the parts here that you can see are emotion self-control, or that regulation, being able to handle conflicts effectively with others, taking initiative, the whole idea of growth mindset, sort of having that optimistic look, like, even though I'm not there yet, I can do it and I will be able to, the more that I try. And I know as educators, we speak to students a lot about that. And I'm sure in your homes you do as well. The ability to clearly express our own ideas. Okay, again, another piece of self-management, and empathizing with how another person is feeling and manage how we interact with them. So that is really encompassing of what self-management is. So when we look back at emotional intelligence, there's really 4 large parts to that, but that is way too much for us to get into in 1 hour for this evening. So we're really focusing on the emotion regulation piece, which is really self-management. So this quote here is one that I turn to often because this particular researcher has done a lot about emotions and behavior in our children. So Mona de la Houck says, we can't truly help children with their behavioral challenges without first helping ourselves to be present, self-aware, and calm. So what we're really saying is that as adults and as parents, we really need to come in calmly and be aware and manage our own emotions when we are coming to our children, whatever age they are, okay, to help them through their tough situation, whatever that is. But if we're coming in with really heightened emotions to our children, that is not going to help them find a calmer place and regulate their own emotions if we can't come from a place of a regulated state.
And I think, Marcel, one thing on
Yeah.
that is that it doesn't mean that we need to just suppress our emotions and not deal with them, because kids and people will pick up on these emotions, even if you're just stuffing them down. Now, if in the moment that's all you can do, that's, better than yelling or being super emotional. But overall, what that means is we have to really take care of ourselves, really process and all that self-care stuff.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, because I feel like that's the important thing that we need to think about as adults. Like, what are the things we need to do sort of when things aren't happening, when we're not in the moment, so that we can come as a calmer parent. And that takes a lot of work for us. And what does that self-care look like? And so one of the things that we're now going to go into is sort of what are our go-to coping strategies as parents, as adults, right? So what are the things that we do when for ourselves, things might feel tough, right? And it could be that day of parenting that was tough. It could be a moment at your job that was tough. It could be a family matter that was tough. And so what do we do to regulate our own emotions so that when we're in those tough times with our kiddos, we can hopefully try to know what we need to do to come calmly to them. So this is a list that really talks about different coping strategies. So I want you to start thinking here. I'm going to go through these, and I would love if you wanted to pop in the chat sort of what your go-to coping strategies are when it comes to those tough moments for you, right? We all have feelings. We all are human. We have emotions. We're going to feel anger. We're going to feel frustration. We're going to feel happy, right? We're going to feel it all. But when things are feeling tough, what do you do, right? And these are really eventually the things we want to start, sharing with our children and modeling. What are they seeing us do? So do you use diversion, right? So are you someone who likes to make a bracelet or draw or paint or go out and garden or take a walk or take a drive? Are you someone who likes to become social, right? Maybe you're having a tough time, but talking to someone is really helpful for you, or sort of that interpersonal stuff, right? Like some of us like to use humor to kind of offset those tougher emotions. Or does it come down to cognitive, making gratitude lists or brainstorming solutions or writing in a journal? Or are you finding that you just need to become more flexible with a situation and that helps you cope with things? There's tension release, types of exercise or playing a sport or simply the whole idea of feeling it and crying or laughing. Or is it more, are you more the physical, right? Is your coping that I really need to get more sleep? Like I am not taking very good care of myself and making sure that I am getting all the healthy nutrients, eating well, sleeping well. Are you using breathing techniques? I know that is definitely something I go to, just thinking about those calming breaths that really truly calm our bodies. The chemistry in our body like literally will change, right? During those moments of taking those breaths. Do you turn to spirituality, prayer, meditation, getting out into nature, or putting your time and efforts into a worthy cause? Or are you more of a limit setting person when things are feeling overwhelming, right? Do you say no? Something we might all need to work on a little bit sometimes. Or simply prioritizing tasks, figuring out what things are the have tos and what things are maybe the want tos, and then the I don't need tos, and prioritizing so that you can feel sort of that weight lifted. So I would love to see in the chat, again, some more thoughts on what you do. So I see focus on breathing. I love it. Exercise is a great stress release, taking walks, talking with a friend.
There's sleep in there too.
I love, sleep. I know. Don't we? Meditation and music. I love these. These are wonderful. So when I think about these coping strategies, they're almost kind of to the idea of when we talk about that self-care, because we need to try to put into ourselves and make sure we're doing that so that we can then put into our children, right? So it's important if we're feeling overwhelmed or frustrated that we are using our coping skills. And again, like I said, modeling those for our children to see at any age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking walks, texting a friend, drawing. I love it. Yes. Food.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just getting food in our bodies because we have had maybe a really long day and realize, oh my goodness, I really need to eat. And that's why I'm feeling frustrated.
Yeah.
These are great. Thank you.
And I love also, there's hiding in the walk-in closet. That's great. If that's where you need to be to get your own sleep. I love that. Lights off, dark. Hopefully nobody will find you when you're trying to have that time. A hot bath. Yeah. Going into the garage and screaming. So that's that big release, right? I love it. And Marcel, these are the things, these are all like positive, really good things, coping strategies. We also have to think about when we're not doing these, how does this come out, right? If you're not doing the coping strategy, then what comes in and fills that space, which usually doesn't help, right? Just something to think about along those lines.
Yes. And we will hit that, I think, when we talk about what's happening to our brains when we're when our emotions are high. So here we are. Look at what a great segue. So we're going to talk just a bit about, so the brain is obviously a really intricate part of our bodies, and there are so many parts to it, but there are three sort of main parts that really are the parts that we can talk about here and even talk about with our children. I talk about this with very young children, talk about it with our youth, our teens, our tweens. I think it's really important that our children even understand this. So this is all about what happens in our brains, like how do our emotions influence our brains? And today, because we're talking about sort of emotion regulation, we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens when tough things are happening. So the three main parts of the brain that, one piece that I wanted to say too was that, a brain is not fully developed until like mid to late 20s, which means that these parts that we're even talking about right now are when you are dealing with your own child or children, or you're a teacher and you're have children in your classroom, that their underdeveloped brain is not going to act in the way that the 40-year-old brain is going to be reacting and responding and working. right? So we may think, like, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and my 10-year-old seems to act a lot older than he actually is. And so sometimes I even have to remind my husband, like, he's 10 and he's acting 10. Like, that is a 10-year-old thing to do. And a friend told me that when my oldest was about 5, like, just remember that she's acting 5. And so sometimes I use that to myself, even like, my child is acting X age, because we have to remember that their brains are still in this tender growing phase. And it is so rapid, but it takes so many years. So there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of teaching, reteaching, modeling. And so when I talk about this, I want you to remember that we're still in a very big development phase of all of this. So the bottom part of the brain is called the brainstem, and it's really in charge of, it's called another word is the instinctual brain. So it's in charge of things like things we don't think about, right? So breathing, blinking, it's like our survival reactions. These are things that have been going on for hundreds of years, right, in the brain. And the more that we know about the brain now, there's a better understanding of what's really happening in the middle part of our brain. So the middle part of our brain is really the limbic system, which is the amygdala is in the middle. It's in charge of all of the feelings, right? And it's in charge of our memories and our stored learning and our behaviors. And then when we look at more of the top of the brain, this is the thinking brain. So the thinking brain, you can see, kind of encapsulates that feeling part of the brain. And that's in charge of our decision making, our language, our reasoning, our problem solving. So let's imagine what's going to happen when tough emotions hit the center of the brain, which is the feeling brain. Well, what happens is our thinking brain has now gone offline. Our thinking brain is not able to receive the information, learn something new, right? Because our feeling brain, which is underneath it, right, I put a fire there because it just makes me think of like that really super frustrated, overwhelmed child, right? I'm sure we can all think about who that might be in our lives, right? It's happened, it's normal. And then they're not receiving anything we're trying to say to them at that time. And so what we are hoping to do is engage children in these sort of emotion regulation strategies, not during this time, right? We want to teach them out of the tough moments. And then when they're in the tough moments, help them through, right? So reminding them of different strategies, which we'll get into, helping them through, and what does that mean as the adult and the caretaker in their life, right? So we are trying to now get our children, or even ourselves, right? Our brains work the same way, back to a calm place. So we're going to talk a bit about how we can work on doing that. So oftentimes when our children are having those tough emotions, right, we are seeing behaviors that we may not necessarily love. And that is, again, a very typical thing that we see from younger children and even our teenagers, right? We're not always going to see what it is that we're trying to teach or even what we're modeling. So this is another great quote that I enjoy using because I feel it really speaks to the whole idea that behavior is really some communication coming from each and every one of us. So when we understand how a child's challenging behavior serves as communication, we can devise strategies that teach the child to communicate in more desirable ways. So let's talk about that for a second. So if we're seeing behaviors, right? So if we look at this great iceberg, and I'm sure some of us have seen this before. I did not create the iceberg, but I did fill this in with some of my own ideas. But the behaviors that we're seeing kind of at the tip, that kind of what do we see on the surface from our kiddos? We may see things like explosive behavior. We might see misplaced anger, procrastination. Maybe they're just like they're not doing their homework. They're not doing what it is that you've asked to do. They don't want to go to their activities. They're sort of deflecting blame onto others. They might be having tantrums. You may see changes in their grades. So these are sort of those behaviors that we're seeing on the outside. But what are our children really communicating? That's the stuff that's below the surface, right? And so if we look below the surface, sort of what's underneath the water with the iceberg, those are the things that we sort of need to be the detective for our own children in our care, whether they're in our classrooms or in our homes, or maybe you're an aunt or an uncle, right? So there's lots of places that we interact with children. So are they stuffing emotions down? And so it's all coming out into these behaviors because they're not expressing themselves. You know, is there a lack of security somewhere, or a lack of basic needs being met? Is nutrition being met the way it needs to be met for this child? What is their self-esteem like, right? Are they building relationships? Do they have friendships? Are they feeling lonely, right? So what we really want to uncover here is what is really going on underneath, because if we can do that, then we sort of can look at what the behavior is communicating so that we can uncover what's going down underneath the surface, which is really what we hope our children will open up and talk to us about, right? At really any age. I mean, from my 5-year-old to my, to now my 12-year-old, she's very open. We've always had that safety at home. And I think building that is a great way to begin and make sure that our children are comfortable. And again, making sure they're getting their sleep, making sure that we are giving them a safe environment to be who they are at home, express themselves, feel their feelings, talk about their feelings. It's a really important way for our children to be able to be who they are in the space that we have created in our homes, and be able to really, like I said, feel what they're feeling and be able to talk about it. Because the more we push them away, even as adults, right, they bubble up and they just get bigger. And so if we can uncover what's going on underneath the surface, then we can really understand, why are we seeing behaviors? So why are we seeing procrastination? Why are there tantrums? Why are we having this constant, battle every time we're trying to leave to go to X place? Well, maybe because they feel a certain way about going there. But getting to talk to our children and uncovering that is an extremely important part of our parenting.
One thing on this, to bring it to a very concrete example, is when our kids say, "I hate you." If you've give me an emoji or something in the chat box if you've experienced that yet. It might have been when they were little, it might be now. You're not alone if you've heard that. I've heard that a couple of times. I've got 3 kids, so chances are high, right? But what that does is, if we focus on those words and that aggression, we miss out on all this stuff below it, and we can react to that and get upset that they said that to us, and then we get angry and start yelling at them, and then you never get to the bottom of the iceberg, and you just stay up here in these really negative, harsh emotions, and all the rest gets lost, and you create a disconnection with your kids.
Yes. And I would say too, like a really big piece of it, and we'll hit it, I think, in a bit, but just having that whole, just validating what our kids are telling us. And it doesn't mean that to us, this sounds big or sounds like a big deal, but we want to make our children feel that we are safe, we are a trusted adult, and that whatever it is they're feeling, that we can validate and we can show compassion to them, regardless of what state they're in, right? And that's really hard. So it comes back to us having our own regulation so that we come in as calm adults to our children. And we'll get a bit more into strategies for our children and things that we can also be, modeling and sharing with them. But really, the behaviors that we see, or the yelling, or the, maybe you have children that have hit, and used physical force. That doesn't mean like, oh, they learned that from, us at home. It just means that that is what they're using right now. They don't know, again, those brains are growing, they're developing, they're learning. They don't know yet how to cope with that deep, tough feeling. And so they're using strategies that just, it's like the instinctual behavior is happening instead of learning what I do with this. And again, that doesn't mean that they saw it at home and now they're going out and they're at school and they hit somebody or bit somebody. It just means that they're not quite sure yet how to cope with it. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to do that.
Somebody asked, how do you talk to your teens about this? This right here, this graphic is a really good way to start that. To talk about, I know I've been like, if your teen is feeling like very angry recently, you might bring this up and say, I know you've been feeling these really strong emotions. Do you think there's something else under the iceberg? And so you have a different kind of language to use there.
And I want to encourage, and we don't have time right now, but I do want to encourage you as the adults in this space, make your own iceberg, right? Like, what are people seeing from you? Because what I notice when I've done this and done my own, I think what we often notice is that we've overcome a lot in our lives, right? Like we've overcome whatever big things, small things, whatever they are. Or maybe then we recognize like, okay, I'm doing these things and there is stuff below the surface. And I think it's a great way for us to also explore the things that trigger us as parents, because I can tell you right now in a very, bold and honest way, like I grew up with a brother who wasn't honest all the time. And so honesty is by far like really big, and I'm sure it is for all of us, but like the littlest little lie triggers me. And I know that. So I know when like, did you wash your hands? And he says yes. And I'm like, He now goes back in the bathroom because he knows, like I told him too, I said, here's why it really bothers me. I grew up in a household where that was a really big deal, and it was over bigger things as you grow up, right? So I think it's a really good exercise for us as parents to, as adults, to sort of make our own too. I think it's a good strategy.
I love that. I have to read this comment from Katie. Katie, you must be a writer or something. This is great. She says, why can I do this so well with my coworkers, friends, and other peers? But when this underage dragon I love breathes fire all over me, I lose my mind. The visual is awesome there.
I love that.
Yeah.
I can totally see it. Well, I mean, as a teacher, I remember people saying to me, oh, you are just going to be the best mom, because I'm, teaching 25 kindergartners. And it's like, when it's your own child and the safety of what they feel at home and their ability to sort of just really let it go, I mean, that is their safe place to do that. So I would hope it doesn't necessarily look exactly the same with your coworkers, but I think that's part of our own emotional intelligence, right? Like, that at work is not the place to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
But at home, it's a little bit more acceptable. And it is hard for us, right? Because we are growing, we are kind of trying to rear these humans, and that's a really, really big job. And we want it to look like what is in line with our values and what we want in our homes and what we want for their future. But only those issues and those blips are going to be those learning experiences, right? So part of it is like those boundaries and testing them and seeing what it's like. And they also have hormones at that age. So it's like, we're just compiling all of it.
They've got a lot. And there's also, somebody mentioned that we pour everything into them and it feels thankless in those moments of unleashing, right? So there's that piece. And there's also an emotional connection that we have with our kids versus our coworkers, right? So while it might hurt our feelings if they lash out at us, it's not like, oh my gosh, this little baby that I love so much is mean to me. It's like, oh, that coworker I don't like, there's some emotional detachment when we're in other places. But with our kids, there's this energetic connection too. So we feel the feels as they're feeling them. And which goes back to Marcel, what you're saying, we got to take care of ourselves so that we don't let their sky high emotions take us up with them or take us down.
Absolutely. I love that. It's so true. Like the love and the care is very different from parent to child.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. So I'm moving on to like, now what can we do, right? So we might be seeing behaviors and we're trying to kind of uncover what's going on. And I think the idea of, taking the iceberg and talking to your child and sort of getting underneath that, depending on their age and developmentally, what you feel is appropriate. But we also can do something really great for our children. And that is oftentimes when things are happening underneath, like maybe the feelings of isolation or not feeling like they're building relationships, or that lack of, sleep, or maybe they're failing at something that they're trying really hard at. So those are things that we can kind of say are dipping into what I call the emotional bucket. So really the things that are really causing and making those tough emotions happen, where then our behaviors are coming out. So some things that we could do to sort of refill that for our children is connecting with them, right? So really being able to check in on how they're feeling, check in on, ask very specific questions dependent upon their age, not just how are you doing or how was school, but get more specific. Think about like, what are the things they're doing in their day? Like, who did you sit with at lunch? Like lunch is definitely a very big deal for our children at any age, right? Who are you with? What did you do? For our younger children, who did you play with at recess? Connecting, playing a game, like really doing something that is if your child likes to, shoot hoops, go shoot hoops with them, spend some time, make time to do those things and spend one-on-one time, especially if you have, multiple children. I know that's hard and we have a lot of things going on in our days, but if we can think about what that affection and what that love really is showing our children, and it's really helping fill that piece back up that they might be having struggles with, right? And a lot of times those connections really bring up the communication. So playing a game with your kiddo or shooting hoops, or whatever it is, taking that walk, going on a hike, filling their bucket. Oftentimes that's when our kids want to open up and start communicating and talking. That's when you might find out what's really going on, So I think that's just kind of a creative way of looking at that big emotional bucket piece of our kiddos.
It's great. And you mentioned like if we have multiple kids or we're super busy and all of that. And sometimes when I talk to parents about stuff like this, they feel like it has to be a big moment. It's like it has to be an hour or going on a hike or something. This can be something as simple as when they're going to bed, stopping in their bedroom and saying, "Hey, good night, honey. I love you." And that small, couple of sentences can be this really big drop in their bucket that mom or dad acknowledged me, said they loved me, and kind of wished me good night, which we used to do a lot when they were little, right? But when they become older, even like 5 or 6, sometimes there's not that bedtime connection even. So it can be small things. So if you can put in the chat box, like, what are some small things you can do like today, tomorrow, like this week, that can start helping to refill your child's emotional bucket? Be great to
I
see.
love that. Yeah, that'd be great. I love that. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference of reacting versus responding, because these are two very different things. And I think as parents, sometimes with all the things and, sometimes we're really quick to react rather than being thoughtful about our responses. So I'm going to pop into another quote, because I love these. So this is Viktor Frankl. He is a Holocaust survivor. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So between when the thing happens, right, and how we respond to it, there is time, there is space, and we can make space. So I'm going to talk about the power of using that space, because if we don't use it, we're doing something called reacting. So reacting when we see something or hear something from our child who might be having a tough moment, is when we're really meeting their action with another action that often causes a greater stress, right? It's instantaneous. It's often like a defense mechanism, or we're just trying to like get through it and try and move on. But what we're really doing is we're sort of perpetuating the situation. We're making things more heightened than we really need to. We're not really thinking about the long-term effects. We're not thinking about what this is going to do in the long run. And oftentimes it's something that we regret, right? So maybe it's screaming, like I'm yelling at my kiddo about something because they're having a tough time. And then that gets me all, up and wired. And now we're just upset at each other and everyone's kind of doing this. But what we really want to try and do is do what I call responding. And because responding is really when we are thinking about taking it in a more responsible way, right? So the word respond comes from responsibility. And that's because we are responding in a calm manner, which again, going back to the beginning of this and talking about what those coping skills are for you, because sometimes responding needs more space, right? So maybe it's that you literally need to remove yourself from the situation before you can respond to what is happening, right? Maybe it's those, couple deep breaths and then you're able to respond. So be thinking about what it is for you personally that you can either do or you already are doing that causes you to respond in a calm, slow manner. So that's thinking first, being deliberate, being considerate of how you are doing and how the other person, in this case, your child is, weighing those long-term effects, right? The difference between yelling at my child when they are having a meltdown about, a temper tantrum about wanting to, get a certain pair of shoes on to walk out the door, as opposed to like me just taking it calmly and whatever, it's 2 more minutes, what's it going to do, right? So thinking about what are the long-term effects, because now we're going to get in the car, we're going somewhere, and now we're just yelling at each other. That is not going to be pleasant for anyone. So thinking about what are the effects, right? And are you acting in a way that is in line with your core values that you're also teaching to your child, right? So we're modeling the behavior we want to see. And absolutely no, this does not happen every time. I have reacted and I have been very quick to react to my kiddos about things that are just like so frustrating and I'm just like want to be done. So yes, we're human too, right? So our emotions are going to get the best of us and that anger, frustration, or overwhelm is going to come out. But if more times than not, we can think about being calm and coming in slowly and getting down to our child's level or maybe up. I don't know, I'm tiny, we're tiny in this house, but we're petite. But thinking about how you can deliberately be considerate of how your child is feeling and respond in a way that would help the situation rather than reacting in a way that will probably hinder the situation. So I would love if you could let us know in the chat, because I really do. I love the participation. What do you do often, or what do you hope to do, right? What do you set out to do when your child is displaying some tough emotions, behaviors coming out, or the attitudes coming out, or whatever you want to call it, and you are going to respond to something? Are you taking breaths? Do you remove yourself from the situation, taking that sort of like personal break and then coming back to it? So what are your ways of trying to be a responder rather than a reactor to your child?
I like that you're asking this, because remember the brain that you had up, right? And when we're in an emotional state, we're not thinking logically. So what we have to do is we have to think ahead of time. And we have to think logically, so that when our emotions are getting the best of us as parents, that we're like, okay, we can tap into that logic that we already thought it out. We don't have to try to kick into our logical brain. We're like, okay, we already thought about this in the calm moments.
Yes.
And because if we don't, what happens is, even with our best intentions that we want to, be a calm parent, and we're not prepared, then what happens is we react instead of respond, and the emotions just blow up. So
Yep. And I think even like someone said here, just remembering they're having a hard time and telling myself that I need to stay calm for them. Like sometimes that's self-talk. Like that's great. Self-talk is great. I love that. I taught my kindergartners self-talk. Like it's so important for us. And that's a great strategy. It's just telling ourselves, like I said, say, my kid is acting 5, my kid is acting 5, or whatever, my kid is acting 13. You just telling yourself that's self-talk. And that's saying to myself, like, okay, now I'm going to come in calmly and I'm going to do this, so give yourself a little pep talk and move on. So the difference between co-regulation and self-regulation is what I'm going to talk about next. So we sort of hit a little bit of that in the last part because we are a, support for our children. And we're supports for our partners in our life, our spouses, right? So co-regulation isn't necessarily something that only happens with younger children or even children in general, right? We may use co-regulation in the workplace, right? We may use it with our partners at home. In this case, I will speak to it a little bit more pertaining to children, but so co-regulation is being responsive, caring, affectionate, like person to come in and sort of help a child when they are having a struggle. So it's not saying, I'm going to send you away to this timeout and you're going to go figure it out over here when they don't have the tools yet or the ability to do that, right? So think of a brand new baby, right? We are co-regulating a brand new baby who's crying because they aren't sleeping or their diaper needs changing or they're hungry, right? So we're coming in and we're soothing the baby because they don't know how to do that yet. And then eventually maybe your baby figures out how to suck their thumb, right? So they're using something that they've sort of learned to do to soothe themselves. But as they get older, things get a little bit more difficult, right? And so we want to come in very, as we said before in the slides before, that sort of response that is calm, that is on their physical level, where we can show them that we are there, we love them no matter what it is that's happening. And we are going to help them figure out how to soothe into a place of calm, right? So one way we can sort of make sure that we're helping children do that is having a structured environment. And that does not mean a rigid environment. That means that when our children feel physically and emotionally safe, they feel predictability in the home, they feel sort of these routines. Of course, we have sports going on. So our dinner time is at, 7 different times each week. It used to be like 6 o'clock every night when they were like little. We can't do that anymore, right? So when I'm talking about those consistent routines, it doesn't mean that everything's on the dot. It just means that things can happen in a way that our children can feel a sense of safety, a sense of calm, and they know sort of what is happening. Okay, so that's really important. Most children will thrive off of sort of that structured routine environment where there's clear expectations, goals, and also clear consequences, right? So as an adult, we are, as I said, modeling what it is that we would like to see from our children. So when they are having a tough time, what are we teaching them, supporting them? What are we showing them? How are we teaching them new skills? So we could talk a bit about what those skills might be, but if we start thinking our own selves about how does my child calm down, right? Is it like I have one child who really wants a hug. I have another child who absolutely, that is totally not what she wants when she's feeling really, really upset about something. Never has she. I have a child, again, the same one, who likes to separate herself and put on calm music, but that is something when she was younger, we used to do together, right? So co-regulation is really when you're coming in to support them, not do it for them, but really showing them, like, remember when we had talked about that sometimes you like listening to calm music when you're feeling sad or when you're, feeling angry. That way, when it comes up, your child knows that that could be a skill for them, but they may not think of doing that. So it might be something you would do for them. Well, let's go up and put on some calm music for you, you know? So co-regulation is really coming in as a soothing adult to help the child find a place of calm, which we want eventually. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to ask it, somebody put in the chat box. So one of the things that this is not just this person, I hear this a lot, like their child is the child that gets very emotionally reactive and yells and gets really big emotions. So what do you do in that moment? Because she's saying, well, I walk away to try to, you know, distance, you know, to put that in there, but then he follows her around and keeps yelling. So what do you recommend in that situation?
So I think the best thing to always remember is that if you can discuss out of that time, you know, when you're feeling angry and mom is trying to take a minute or whatever it is you're trying to do to kind of take your time out or whatever you want to call it, right? To step away and reset. I like calling it resetting, right? Or refocusing. So maybe you talk to your child. I don't know how old this child is, so it's a little bit hard for me to know for sure. I don't know if it's like, okay,
Can you
perfect.
tell us?
Thank you.
There we go. Okay.
So we have an 8-year-old who's following mom, who's trying to like reset. So I think what's really, really good is for you to be able to say during a time that we are not upset, that things are calm, and have that connection and have that conversation. You know, one thing that mom really likes to do or needs to do when I am feeling overwhelmed or when I'm feeling angry or whatever words and emotions that you talk about in your home that you can use for him to understand, you know, it's really important that mom's able to step away and take a little reset. And resetting means that I can refocus on what it is we're trying to do together so that I can come back to you and be, you know, able to resolve or whatever it is you're trying to get through. But I think it's really important. And as an 8-year-old, I think he can absolutely understand, like, this is what I need to do. And so during that time, you can't be doing this. So let's figure out what you can do during that time till mom comes back, right? So I think having that and having a plan and him knowing what that plan is. At our home, I have in my kids' rooms breathing exercises on their walls. We have the circle of control. What are you in control of? What are you not in control of? And so that's always a place that like they could go and like look at things and they have visuals for reminders. So I don't know if you have a space for your little guy, but I highly encourage a reset space in your home for your kids and even for teenagers, like a beanbag with some music or whatever. But reset spaces are so great. And so then you can say like, I'm going to my reset space and you're going to your reset space. And then we can come together and then we can kind of work through. So I really think like having that conversation and creating a plan would be my best advice to you.
I love that. And one of the things is as you are taking this advice that Marcel is talking about and implementing it, he might resist for the first few times because kids like the patterns that have already been set there, right? So that's one thing just to know, just try it a few times, don't give up. And the other piece of that is that if we think back to the iceberg and he's angry, right? But he's got all these other emotions under it and you walk away, he sees it as being like just left out in the cold, so to speak, right? That, oh, she's just abandoning me. I'm going through this big emotion and she's just walking away. So if you do what Marcel said, you talk about it ahead of time that you're saying, I'm not trying to ignore you. I just know it's not helping. Let's have this plan. Then he doesn't feel that abandonment and have an increased anger. So I think with those few things that you'll see a difference and a change and you'll feel more in control too, Mom.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, like that wonderful buy-in when children are able to like create that space together. And it literally doesn't need to be anything big, but like maybe it has fidgets, maybe it has some visuals, like maybe it has a little beanbag or whatever, like, you know, and do it with him, give it a name. Like, I don't know. It's like Alexander's no good, very bad day or whatever. It was Australia, I think, but just somewhere where then he feels like it's his and you guys created it together and then kind of make that plan. So
yeah, it's not a punishment space, right? It's a space where
no.
the calming space. So
Yeah.
Marcel, let me ask you another question that somebody's put here. And I totally get this question, by the way. The strategy that her son uses is he wants to be alone for a bit to read and cool down. Great strategy. And it's awesome that he knows that about himself. So it does work really well, but later when they go to debrief, he gets upset all over again. So the question is it important to review the situation episode? We don't want to avoid it, but also don't want to make it worse.
So I think the whole idea of moving on from the big emotion is like gold, right? So if we're not just like sitting in it and like still angry and still mad and whatever, like if it is something that you feel like you need to like debrief, but I almost feel like it sounds like the child like took themselves through the whole thing and they're ready to just move on now.
Yeah.
Like if it's something you need to talk about, like maybe you just wait till later that night or even the next day, like, hey, yesterday, and give it a shot at a different time rather than right then. Cause it sounds like they've sort of gone through the whole like self-regulation and then able to like express it and get through it and then literally move on, which is really actually a really big to still not be sitting in the tough emotion. So I guess it depends on what it is, but I would say like that's actually really great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Now, I think in this situation, if we're talking about maybe that your son was explosive to you and said maybe some mean things, it is absolutely okay for you to get that process for yourself to say, I don't deserve to be treated like that. I know that you were really angry, but it's not okay. And most of the time when our kids lose their control like that, they feel bad about it. So if we can come at it with compassion, talking about this thing that happened, then it doesn't get them back into that anger. But like Marcel said, sometimes they're past it. If it's something that doesn't need to be debriefed, then you don't need to debrief it. But you could also say something as simple as, you were really angry before, just if you want to, is there anything that you want to talk about? If they say no, then that's okay, move on.
Well, and I mean, Sherry, of course, you're always so eloquent about what you're saying. And I love how you put that emotion to it, right? Like, I know you were really angry and that's validating to your child. Like, even though maybe they were very rude to you, disrespectful, not how we speak in our home, and you want to go through that process. I do think saying that outright so that the child knows that you do know that they were angry or they were really frustrated about something. It's okay to tell them, like, I know you were angry, and put that to it before going into, this is not how we speak to each other in our home, and, whatever the debrief needs to be at that point. But
and yeah, the important piece there is that you're teaching them, as you were talking about role modeling, that you don't deserve to be treated like that. But what you're also saying in that same sentence is they don't deserve to be treated like that either. If they are with a partner who yells when they're angry, that you're showing them how do you deal with that? How do you set your own boundary?
Good one. Okay, so a little bit here, emotion self-regulation. So this is really from that co-regulation while we are modeling and we're teaching and we're sort of giving that safety space for kids to live in and feel like they can communicate with us and, what is going on with these big emotions, because it's a very normal part of life. So self-regulation is when we become self-soothers, right? When we are able to manage our emotional impulses, right? When our children start responding rather than quick reacting about things, thinking first before acting. How many times do we want to say that to our children? Their own ability, that emotional resilience of bouncing back after disappointment. So as we were just saying about this child, going through that and able to sort of like move on, if that's an appropriate thing where we don't need to keep talking about whatever it is. Their own ability to be able to do that, behaving and acting consistent with your family values. And then these things really do help with the success in our relationships with each other at home, with peers, later on in the workplace. So as adults, you know, if you are working with other people, being able to self-regulate, like the gal earlier that talked about the dragon child at home and then the people at work, right? Well, obviously, if those people at work are making you feel annoyed about something, you are able to regulate yourself so that you can like do the work thing and like maybe talk about it later. So those are, I mean, it is a huge skill. And like I said, co-regulation, as I understand it and believe it to be true, I mean, my husband needs co-regulation sometimes, right? Like he would like some help to regulate also. So this isn't just a baby or child thing, right? But what we are trying to do when I said we're going to talk more about children is really showing them these strategies, modeling them, practicing them, teaching them, and them being able to eventually use them. So my 10-year-old shoots hoops up in his room when he's feeling frustrated, or he's really good at taking breaths, which at first he said he thought I made it up and it was all a joke. And then I had to tell him all the science behind it. And then they talked about it at school and he's like, ooh, my teachers know it too. So a lot of kids might push it away at first. And like Sherry said, like the first time might not be their favorite nor the second, you know, but trying things more than once is really good for kids. So this is a little bit more into that modeling. So during calm times is when we want to really be teaching kids. And of course, we're modeling them ourselves. And it's good to say, like, you know, like we talked about the reset space, like it's good for me to be able to say to my kiddo, like, I am really angry right now and I need to go reset. So I'm going to go to my space and we can talk about this after, or, you know, whatever it is. If we can't find ourselves in a calm enough place to come to our child and we don't feel like we're going to be making a situation better at that moment, then we're going to have to do something, right? Or maybe it's something with someone else and we had a situation maybe with a friend or a coworker. It's okay to tell our children, like, what are you doing to sort of help cope with your big feelings, right? So we're practicing and we're also talking about it. So sometimes it's asking for help, right? So we might have a kiddo who's feeling really, really frustrated about something and they've tried it on their own and it's time to ask for help, right? So teaching them to be able to do that, just naming our feelings. So growing our kids' emotional vocabulary, using vocabulary at home is extremely important for our kids to be able to name their own feelings, be self-aware, be able to say how they're feeling and be able to express that. We don't want them to just be calm, right? We want them to feel it. We want them to express it. And we want them to then be able to calm down. So expressing their feelings by naming their feelings, okay? Really important. Do they like to create things, right? So do they like to do art or crafts or puzzles or use technology or do some sort of writing or building, right? Sometimes just getting into the Lego and just, you know, focusing on something else is a great way for kiddos to sort of, you know, come out of the difficult, tough emotion, right? Sometimes it's alone time. Some kids do not like that. Like the 8-year-old here, I don't think likes that. I have one child who does not like that either. And I have one that loves alone time. Maybe it's breath work or yoga. Maybe it's like someone said here too, as simple as like, my kiddo needs some food. I think like the emotions are really high right now, but it's, you know, or maybe it's movement of some sort, right? Or our mind, right? Maybe it's journaling or using music. A reset space with little, you know, headphones or something that they could play some music on, I think is a great thing for kiddos that enjoy listening to music. Maybe it's just like simply relaxing, like getting more relaxed, finding a place where they can just chill out and not feel like, you know, there's so much going on in their life. There's the homework's done, everything's done. It's time to just chill out. Or like I said, there's the hug. Maybe you have a child that the connection is really important where you can do an activity together or playing a game and open up the communication. Or as Sherry said too, like it doesn't have to be like a long thing, but it could be, you know, a simple connection, right? Where it's small, but it is really meaningful to them. And so if they're out of sorts, that connection is going to be really helpful. So these are all really great coping strategies that we may be using as adults, or things that we can be introducing to our children. You know, I know my daughter and I have done a lot of like beading of bracelets or making the friendship bracelets with string. And I noticed that she goes in her room and that's something she will do when, you know, to kind of find her quiet. And so coping with the long day, she has a phone. She doesn't have much on it other than, you know, texting maybe her friends or calling them, but that's not what she's doing in her room. I come in and she's making friendship bracelets. So it's a great way to decompress. So I think the more we can share with them too, like tell them that's what they're doing, right? Like looks like you had a really long day. You're creating, like what a great thing to do when you come home to sort of, you know, decompress or calm when you're home from your long day, or, you know, so talk to them about it and point it out.
I love that. Marcel, as we're winding up here, it's 8:03.
Yeah,
So
this is it.
Perfect timing.
This is it. Yeah.
Go for it.
Do you want me to just pop into it real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So navigating life's ups and downs, because we're going to have them, right? So just please, parents, we all need to have compassion for ourselves, right? You are here tonight. Like that is amazing, right? We're taking time to discuss really important parts of parenting and life skills for our children. Have compassion for yourself. We're gonna do things really right, and we're gonna do things really that we feel are wrong. There's always time for repair. There's always time for learning. Just showing up for our kids is the number one thing that we can do, right? So just checking in. How are they feeling? Ask them questions, connect with them. You know, there's wisdom in stepping back. Sometimes our kids are struggling. Sometimes they're absolutely failing, right? But these are all really, really learned, really great learning pieces for life for them. And that is hard for us as parents to sort of see those things happen, but know that in the end, like we're making our kids stronger by stepping back. And emotions are super valuable information. So the more emotional vocabulary you can teach your child, the more words they can have in their word bank to really be able to express how they are truly feeling, will be extremely beneficial for your connection with them, for their own self-care and self-awareness, and their own care and empathy for others, which for me is another really important piece of once we can understand how we're feeling, it's time to really understand how other people are feeling. So that's a picture of my daughter. Because I just feel like, you know, there's all kinds of messy in our lives, and we need to have compassion for ourselves and for our children. So this is me. I am from FeelLinks, which is the company that I found and own, and I have resources for mostly younger kids, and a book that my daughter and I just wrote together coming out soon. And I just really appreciate getting to talk to you tonight. And I just love spreading education. And I hope this was really thought-provoking for all of you.
Absolutely, Marcel. This was wonderful. I would ask all of you, if you see there's like a reaction button at the bottom, if you can give Marcel a reaction there. I don't know what is available there, but I know there's like hearts and things. So let's give her a reaction, an emoji, something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Do you see them all coming your way, Marcel?
I see them. Thank you so much.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, everyone, for doing that.
I'm sending love back. Yeah. We're all in this together.
Yes,
for real.
for sure.
Even if we don't actually know each other, we're all doing it. So
all right.
All right. I will stop my screen share and let you take it over there, Sherry.
Okay, sounds good. And the last thing that I would love to get from everybody is kind of a takeaway from tonight, an aha moment, something that you're like, I'm going to do this, or that made so much sense to me. And as always, we're open to feedback. If you have things you want to hear about or learn about, you can put those in the chat box too. So we're going to go to our ending screen, but we're going to stay in here just for a little bit so you can put those things in the chat box. And I believe there's usually a survey that it's going to pop you into. If you can fill that out for us, that is fantastic. Marcel, thank you so much for taking your time and being here with us tonight. As always, amazing information and so many things that we can go home and implement right away that are going to make such a big difference in our lives. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic night.